Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to recommend some nonfiction and fiction books that I think are best read together. Long before I ever joined BookTube, I discovered that reading a fiction book and a nonfiction book that were somehow connected or covered similar ground was a great way to get more out of my reading if I read them at the same time or around the same time, so I was pairing them up. So just for example, sometimes I would read a work of historical fiction set in a specific era, and I would pair that up with a work of history that looked at that specific era. Sometimes the work of history was even a book that the historical fiction author had consulted as part of their research for their novel. Or I would read a biography of a specific author and pair that up with one of that author's works. I found that by doing this, it really enriched my overall reading experience. It helped me get more out of both of the books, and it really helped me retain more of what I was reading. The only problem with this approach is that it can be really challenging to know before you've read the books what fiction and nonfiction books would make good pairs. You can do your best to guess, you can read synopses, you can hear what other readers have to say, you can put two books together and hope for the best, but it's really hard to know if they're going to make a good pair because you don't know the contents that are inside. For that reason, for many years now, I have been making these annual recommendations videos in which I suggest fiction and nonfiction books that I think would work really well together, so there is no guesswork involved on your end. Let's jump straight into my recommendations, and I want to start off with a more straightforward one for anyone out there who may be new to these types of recommendations. I think this one will really help you get a sense of what I mean by these pairings. So, if you have not yet read the very popular nonfiction book, The Radium Girls by Kate Moore, or if you're looking to give it a reread, you might want to consider pairing it up with the novel Zori by Laird Hunt. The Radium Girls tells two sets of absolutely heartbreaking stories about women working as dial painters. They would apply this luminous paint made with radium, which we now know is radioactive and extremely dangerous. They would apply it to the faces of watches to make them glow, but it was very precise work, and in order to get it done, the tips of their brushes needed to have a point to it. And to achieve this, they would stick the brush in their mouth to point the tip of it before dipping it back into the paint and then going about their work. They would do this over and over again every single day they worked. So they were consuming radioactive material day after day after day, and they were told it was safe. They suffered devastating health consequences, to say the least. And shockingly, it happened to not just one group of women, like I said before, but two, because it happened to a group of women who were working at a plant in New Jersey, and then it happened all over again to the women who were working at a plant in Illinois. And the reason why I suggest reading The Radium Girls with the novel Zori is that the titular main character of this novel works at the plant in Illinois. She doesn't stay very long, but unfortunately her friends do. And so we hear about their very sad but inevitable declines in health. Zori is a very calm, very short little novel about the elderly Zori looking back at her entire life. It's got some beautiful writing, and I think the historical context provided by the Radium Girls could make it an even more rewarding read. And the next pairing is also another one that I don't think would be immediately obvious just by looking at both books. You kind of need to know what's inside of the books to know that they would work well together. So I suggest you read the strange little classic book called Green Mansions by William Henry Hudson, either at the same time or shortly after you read the nonfiction book, A Most Remarkable Creature by Jonathan Meiberg. A Most Remarkable Creature is a very strange book to try to explain. It's essentially a natural history book about this very intelligent, very mischievous species of bird of prey called the striated caracara, but it's that and then some. The author branches out into all of these different topics of discussion that all originate from his central question. And that question is, how did these weird birds get this way? One of those tangents brings us to naturalist and writer William Henry Hudson, the author of Green Mansions. And he comes up not only because he's Argentinian and these birds are found on the Falkland Islands just off the coast of Argentina, but also because he's one of the very few writers at the time who spoke positively about these birds. People by and large hated them. His writing is discussed a lot in A Most Remarkable Creature, character. His presence is almost like that of T.H. White in Helen Macdonald's memoir, H is for Hawk. And of course, his most famous novel, Green Mansions, gets a shout out. Green Mansions is this very strange, vaguely fantastical jungle romance that was then adapted into a film starring Audrey Hepburn. He's largely forgotten today, but Jonathan Meiberg shines a spotlight on him in A Most Remarkable Creature. This nonfiction book is almost as much the William Henry Hudson show as it is the striated Cara Cara show, so I think it's a good idea to have his most famous novel on standby in case you're very much intrigued by him by reading the nonfiction book and want to pick up some of his work. My third pairing recommendation involves my favorite novel that I read last year, Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This is a novel about a woman named Janie, who is searching for both love and agency as she navigates different romantic relationships. Without revealing too much, I would like to suggest you read this book alongside A Furious Sky by Eric J. Dolan, which is a history of hurricanes in North America. Let's just say that Their Eyes Were Watching God takes place mainly in Florida, and the novel gets a mention in A Furious Sky. I think that reading these two together would really add to the atmosphere as you read the novel. It would really make you feel like you're there with the characters. There's a first for my channel coming up in this next pairing. A few months back, I read a nonfiction book called The Joy of Sweat by Sarah Everts. This is a book all about sweat. It talks about the science of sweat, but then in a very Mary Roach style, the author also talks about her different adventures that she experienced while going out and researching different topics related to perspiration. You may think that sounds gross, but it's actually a surprisingly fascinating book. And if you decide to pick it up, I would absolutely recommend reading it alongside a manga series called Sweat and Soap. This is an office romance starring a woman who works at a soap company who has a sweating problem. She sweats profusely. She really doesn't like it. She's insecure about it. It's an inconvenience more than anything. But there's a man who also works at this same company who has a very sensitive nose, and he is captivated by the way she smells. I know it sounds strange. When I first heard about it, I thought it had the potential to be really creepy. But I'm glad I gave it a chance because it's actually very cute. And I think it pairs up so perfectly with The Joy of Sweat, not just because both of them talk about sweat, but because there is a specific chapter in The Joy of Sweat where the author goes speed dating, and the way that everyone chooses their dates is based exclusively on the way that everyone's sweat smells. And then the author talks about the science of why our sweat smells the way that it does. So I think these two are just perfect together. And then finally, there's a little bit of a bonus to this last pairing. There are actually two nonfiction books that I could see pairing up very nicely with a novel that I recently fell head over heels in love with called Sirens and Muses by Antonia Angress. This is a novel that takes place in the very early 2010s, and we follow 4 different people, 3 students, 1 teacher, who are all connected to an elite art school in New England. If you're interested in the art aspect of this novel, then I think pairing it up with 7 Days in the Art World by Sarah Thornton could be a really good idea. This nonfiction book is kind of like a sampler platter for the art world, and I think it would flesh out some of the nuggets of the art world that can be found in the novel. Like, one of the characters has art collector parents. Art collectors are discussed in the nonfiction book, as are the crit sessions that the students experience. But since a lot of this novel takes place alongside the Occupy Wall Street movement, in fact, one of the characters finds himself involved in it, I could also suggest that you pair this up with something like Occupy, Scenes from Occupied America, which is a collection of essays from people in New York and beyond talking about what this time was like and their own experiences participating in the protests. I think either one of these nonfiction books would make a great companion for Sirens and Muses. Or you could even read both if you're feeling ambitious. So those were this year's fiction and nonfiction pairing recommendations. But if you want more recommendations like this, I have done so many videos like this in the past, so I'm going to link all the ones that I've done in prior years in the description box below. If you are on a mobile device, device, just tap the title of this video and that will expand for you. All the books that I discussed today will also be linked down there for your clicking convenience. And at the bottom of that exact same description box, you'll see links to everywhere you can find me around the internets, like Goodreads and Instagram, the two places where I'm the most active, in case you would like to keep up with what I am reading and writing about right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.